Let's get going. Awesome. As you guys know, you guys are here to learn about mass surveillance and how it's being used for the deportation machine. And today we have a special guest. His name is Kenny Morris. He is the campaign strategist for AFSC, and he works with our Center for Corporate Accountability. He supports campaigns against companies that profit from border militarization and surveillance, including the global campaign against the surveillance company Palantir Technologies. And we're really excited to share that him and his team have had a great victory pushing Palantir out of New York hospitals. So congrats and thank you for being here. And me, which I always forget to introduce myself, but my name is Miriam Ordóñez Rodriguez, and I'm the Immigrant Rights Program Coordinator for Colorado. A lot of what we will be presenting today, and here's a quick agenda, is going to be what Kenny's going to be presenting is applicable, sadly, to the nation, and what I'll be presenting is specific to Colorado. But ideally, due to the heaviness of the subject that we will be covering, we do want to open a space up after the presentation for folks to stay and discuss how they're feeling, as well as any thoughts that come up from this presentation. Cool. So from here, this is I really recommend this book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and something that is really important to stress, right, is, as this quote says, the oppressor's tranquility rests on how well people fit the world the oppressors have created and how little they question it. The goal of this presentation is for us not just to question what surveillance tech is doing in our communities, but to see the harm that it's creating. The goal is not to cause fear. The goal is to share information on the world that is being created around us to harm most of us, almost, I want to say all of us, not just the immigrant community, but as a collective. While this webinar will be concentrating on the harm towards the immigrant community, it is important to recognize that this harm is and can be done and replicated to other groups. Speaking truth helps us shape the reality, and we bring this to you all with the utmost respect in hopes that this information can ignite change and keep you safe as well as your community. This presentation can cause fear and some emotional turmoil based on the different identities that we have. We ask that you take care of yourself, but also I want to make sure that we can create a container where we can put some of this fear. And as I said, we will be processing a lot of the information that we had shared after our presentation. So I ask you all to please close your eyes and imagine yourself in a place that brings you power and peace. This can be any place that you have either imagined while reading or seen in a movie, just a place that brings you power and peace. Now imagine that in your hands, you are holding an open container. This can be a box, this can be a jar, anything that has a lid. This is your container, and this is where we will be putting our fear later in this presentation. Right now it's open. Thank you. From here, I'm going to pass it on to Kenny if I can change my slides properly. Thank you, Kenny. It's the floor.
Thank you so much, Miriam, and thank you everybody for having me this afternoon and this evening. Miriam is absolutely right that the topics that we're going to be talking about surveillance, can be very scary. There can be a lot of fear here. And so again, our goal is not to leave with fear. Also, my goal is to tell us, to have us all learn about the tools that ICE has to surveil us, but then also some things that we can do about it. So there'll be tips and things to consider throughout this presentation about how we can very directly change and really make ourselves and our community safer. But in order to talk about mass surveillance, I think we first have to talk about Gladys Diaz Toledo. Gladys, she's actually not pictured here in this slide. She was in a place in Washington called Tijuanita for the Mexican enclave that was there. And Gladys, she makes piñatas. She one time she posted a piñata online in a private Facebook group, a buy and sell group with a few thousand members, and she was selling a cupcake for about $20, and it was very cute. It had a smile, had a face on it, and so Gladys posted this online, and she got a message from a Facebook account that they wanted to buy this cupcake, and an account, it was an account with a Hispanic name and a picture of a dog as a profile picture, and they told her that they would like to meet her at the bank. And what we know through dispatch phone records from the local police is that ICE had actually staked out Gladys's home that morning. Her partner Rios, who's pictured here, he actually waved at them because he recognized them. And the agents, they called dispatch at around 10 a.m. in the morning to say that they had given up. It wasn't going to work. They weren't going to be able to arrest Gladys. But 18 minutes later, they called back saying that they thought that their person was going to be at the bank. So Gladys, she packs up her daughters and heads over to the bank, where unfortunately the two agents arrest her in front of her daughters, traumatizing them for the rest of their lives. And Gladys had previously been deported, so they sent her to a detention facility for about 3 weeks before deporting her to Jalisco, thousands of miles away from her family. And so that, to me, is what surveillance really is. And Gladys' story really shows the surveillance because it incorporates her social media, her location, her address, and that's how surveillance really impacts our lives. So in the next slide, we can see that this kind of web, right? And I think the easiest way for me to think about surveillance is through this one company called Palantir. And Palantir, their products, and what they say is they look for patterns in massive data sets. When I say massive data sets, think of a spreadsheet with millions and millions of rows, and now make 12 of them. And what Palantir does is it looks at and connects all the different data points all in one place for ICE. So as we continue on these next slides, what that information is things like your address. It's also information like your license plate or your social media, your location, oftentimes, or even information that's very intimate, like your past romantic partners or your credit history, interactions with police. And not only that, but they have the same information on your family. And so this is what it does. It brings together all of this information in one place. And we're going to talk a lot about how they get this information and what we can do about it. And that's what this presentation is looking at how ICE is collecting this information and the next steps that we can take. So we're going to be talking a little bit about what's called the virtual border wall, starting on this next slide. And there's many organizations that study this and do a lot of amazing work on this, like the Electronic Frontier Foundation or the Just Futures Law or Surveillance Resistance Lab. And so, but we're going to be talking about how it can impact us. And the virtual border wall is called that because we know of the physical border wall that has been erected on our southern border, but the virtual border wall really extends into places like Colorado or into places all the way up to Maine. And the virtual border wall, it actually got its start in around 2011 under President Obama, then President Obama. They invested a lot of resources into these, beginning with tools like this, like these towers, to try to focus more on data surveillance because they thought it was more humane. But unfortunately, it created this network of mass surveillance that we're talking about today. And the first technology that we're going to talk about are these towers. These are surveillance towers that they are put up next to the border wall, next to the physical border wall. And I think it's the most visual showing of the virtual border wall. It started in 2006 and it greatly increased in 2022 with a 10-year expansion to plan following 2022. And there's three different kinds of towers built by three different companies. But what these towers can do, they're these cameras on these poles with little with solar panels. And what they can do is they can detect people up to 2 miles away. And then some can even detect people up to 7 miles away with higher rates for vehicles. And then there's an AI system that monitors and flags different movements and different people for agents. And of these companies, one of them being Anduril, as is known for their AI surveillance, and Elbit Systems and General Dynamic are also moving into this AI surveillance using these towers. And I just want to highlight Elbit Systems because Elbit is an Israeli company that sold this tower tech to the Border Patrol. They were one of the first companies to do so. And what they said to Border Patrol is that these were battle tested because they were also along the apartheid wall throughout Palestine. General Dynamics is the fifth largest weapons manufacturer in the world with massive contracts to the Department of Defense and ICE for equipment on biometrics. But what we can do is in this next slide, we can learn about where they are. Um, this is the first of the resources that I'll be sharing with all of you. And don't worry, I will be sending these slides out afterward. But the tip here is to know where they are, know how these towers have expanded. And Electronic Frontier Foundation, they have done some amazing work tracking these towers, and they show which companies own them and where they're being put up. Um, and next, we're going to move on. And also, if you have any questions about these companies, you can go to investigate to learn more. But the next piece is the one that I think is very serious. It's about these companies that are called data brokers, where they buy and collect everyone's data and then sell it in large packages to clients like ICE. This information includes your address, phone number, credit reports, or where you pay your utilities, healthcare providers, and often many things that you've posted on social media. And these are the companies that do it. They often have different businesses on the side, like Thomson Reuters. They also do news, or LexisNexis. They're all big in the academic space, but they also collect and sell data to the immigration enforcement, excuse me. And one of the big things about these companies is they also sell real-time incarceration data. So there are stories where people have been arrested, people who do not have documents have been arrested, and because of strong sanctuary city laws, police can't let ICE have this person. But because ICE will buy that information from these companies, they will know that they're in custody and oftentimes wait outside for when the person is released. And so that's what these companies can enable ICE to do. It gives them so much more information about us. But on this next slide, we can think about some different ways to go against this. And this is the first of a few tips that I'll have today. These are just tips. And everybody's risk profile is different. So I think that it's always a conversation about what is right for you. But it's always good to consider something like a data removal service because there are many states that have very strong data protection laws. California, Colorado, I believe, has some. And these are companies, these are services that you can pay for that will send takedown requests on your behalf to data brokers. And then so legally, the data brokers have to take your information out of their databases that they're selling. And these are just four of the ones that I'm familiar with. I'm sure that there's many more. And often these services, they're not free, but they are worth it many times. We're gonna pause here. We're gonna pause here for any questions. If Jennifer, if you've seen any questions in the chat.
No veo nada en el
Mhm.
chat. There's nothing in the chat right now. So if folks have a question and want to raise your hand, we can take questions that way too.
Well, we'll pause a few more times throughout this presentation. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and then we will be answering them as we go. Um, Next piece of tech that we're going to be talking about is about social media. And social media it's a tough one because this is tech that ICE uses. They have many different tools that can gather a lot of information about us, often just based off of a single identifier is what they call it. And this is the one that we'll be talking about today is Babel X, where ICE agents can use this tool to search up things like your name or your email or your phone number, and then it'll show them your social media history. And Babel X enables vast monitoring of everybody, but has been tasked specifically with monitoring refugees and asylum seekers. And according to DHS, it's travelers who may be subject to further screening, and they're looking specifically for terrorist-related content for interception and border security to find radicalized groups and individuals using keyword searches across all of these databases. And Babel X with social media monitoring, it's unfortunately not new either. The highest count of new awards going to this company actually happened in 2021, and the highest amount of federal government revenue also was in 2023 under then President Biden. And so thinking about social media, it's always a tough subject. I use social media, but on this next slide, we're going to be looking at some ways that you might consider changing how you move on social media. Again, that this is always a conversation, and you always have to look to what it makes the most sense for you and your personal risk assessment for what you need. So the first step is always assessing your personal risk level and curate your content or how you're moving on social media accordingly. Also, you can consider what name or email or phone number you use to sign up. And then once you've gone through those things, also discuss with your community and your friends, the people you trust, about what precautions feel right. And consider always that law enforcement can view your posts, often especially of protests or actions. And the one thing I will highlight there is that you always want to avoid sharing your location on your posts, especially if you're there currently. So sometimes you can geotag a post, and that's okay, but always make sure that something that you can do is to make sure that you're tagging these posts once you're no longer there, or avoid using your location at all. So this brings us to the next part of our presentation, where we actually have three different actions that I hope that we can actually do together. We can do these three things right now, and it'll greatly improve all of our digital security and bring us closer towards managing this risk. The first one that we're going to talk about is that some applications on your phone, they will actually be collecting data on us and then selling that data like a data broker would. These can be apps that are games or different third-party apps that don't come with your phone. And unfortunately, we do not have a list of these different apps, but there's a good rule of thumb that if an app is free, often you are the product because they're trying to advertise to you or they're trying to collect different data about us. And so one thing, right, Pokemon Go, the one thing that might be a good thing is to consider deleting apps that you don't use anymore. If you haven't used an app for a few weeks or months even, consider deleting it. And then that actually brings your risk level way down because those apps can no longer be tracking you anymore. The next thing we're going to talk about is also has to do with our phones. Because I mentioned advertising, and unfortunately, our phone's advertising settings can be used against us. And what I mean by that is that when there's a very sophisticated process of what ads show up on your phone at any given time, and I can send more resources about it if you'd like, but what the process includes is that these different advertisers, they're trying to advertise to a very specific audience, and so they want to know all the information about that. So when an ad pops up, they actually get to receive information about us. Sometimes it's very personal information, and sometimes it's information that's all the way to our locations. And so these advertisers, as they're trying to sell us and show us ads, they are also collecting our information that, again, ICE can buy from them. But the good thing is that if we go to our next slide, is that we can actually turn this feature off of our phone. So I'm hoping we can spend a few minutes before we take questions to go through this on our phones. I have the instructions for Android and then also for iPhone. For if you have an Android phone, you can go on your settings app, then go to security and privacy, go privacy and ads. And then if you tap delete advertising ID, that's the big thing that you're looking for, is deleting your advertising ID, and then tap it again on the next page to confirm. And so again, this might be different for different phones, but what you're looking for is your advertising ID on an Android. On an iPhone, there's two things that we have to do. We have to go first to settings, privacy, and then there's something called Apple advertising, and then switching off your personalized ads. The second thing, once you do that, will be settings, privacy and security, and then go tracking, and then turn off the allow apps to request to track. So we're going to take about 1 minute for everybody to go through that. I would highly recommend going through these steps. And then we'll come back. So I hope everybody went through these steps, and I just want to congratulate everybody that you just took a really big step to blocking a lot of the surveillance tech that we have that ICE is using against us. And we're gonna go through one more. Actually, no, we're gonna pause here for questions. Does anybody have any questions that we?
We did have one question in the chat.
Yeah.
Given how much data ICE has already purchased, how much does it really help to use a data removal service? As it wouldn't purge that info from an ICE database, right? If they already bought it.
Yeah, that's a good question. So data removal services like Delete Me, they are not always perfect. Oh, Miriam, we're showing your messages. Um, those data removal services are not always perfect. They're not magic. They can't delete you off of the internet either. But the big thing about them is about risk mitigation, and so trying to reduce the amount of risk that you're at. And what they can do is reduce your risk in the future. So as more data brokers collect your information, it will kind of stop that going forward. So again, I think that it's a really good point that it won't take out your data from anything that they've bought in the past, but they can stop it for the future. I also see one in the chat. Is it okay to have location services set to while using for some of my apps? I think so, yes. It's just more about the location data that you're sharing with apps that you might not need your location, right? Thinking about Google Maps, that might make sense to have your location on so you can know where you're going. But other apps don't necessarily need to know your location. And so requesting that they don't track it is a good step there. So we're gonna keep going to this next slide. We have one more thing that we can do right now, actually, and it's about notifications. If you're using a secure messaging app, like many do, like Signal or WhatsApp, where they say that they're end-to-end encrypted, where allegedly you're the only one who knows the message content, right? So if I send a message to Medium, only myself and Medium would know about what's in that message and not another company. When you send a text, it first has to go through a tower, and so the company knows what that is, what message you're sending. But so with notifications, if you're using a secure messaging app, if you have your like notification previews, it's been found out that the the authorities, they can actually look into that. If they get your phone, they can look through those notification previews and find what those messages sent were. So a good tip would be to go through these instructions on your phone to try to hide that content, to hide those notification previews, to be sure that you're completely secure. So we're going to talk a little bit about, and we'll also send these slides after, so with these instructions. The next few slides are going to talk more about these companies and other tools that ICE has. But again, congratulations, everybody. We just stopped 3 really big ways that ICE surveils us. And now we're moving on to things like facial recognition software. And facial recognition is also called biometrics. And these are companies that create what's called a face print that can compare your photos on social media and ports of entry. And so they're using these pictures when they take of you when verifying your identity when you enter the country or get on a flight. A tip there is that you can actually easily opt out and say that you'd like them to just instead scan your passport. You don't have to have them scan your face, but they're comparing those pictures to the picture that they might take on the street, like this ICE agent here. And we're going to talk a little bit about Clearview AI. And Clearview AI, they have gotten millions of dollars in contracts that they are looking into different exploitation cases, but also investigations into what they call assaults on law enforcement officers, as well as they have many contracts with DHS. And Clearview AI is actually deemed illegal in the European Union because its database violates their privacy laws. It's a very controversial company with founders with far-right ties and very direct ties to our current President Trump. And ICE is one of their top customers. And again, they got many of their first big contracts under the Biden administration, and they're now expanded under Trump. The other piece that we're going to talk about is Mobile Fortify. You may have heard about this. It's an app that ICE agents can use on their phone, and that allegedly they can scan the people in front of them and then compare it to their database of our faces, try to identify who that person is in front of them. And so this ICE agent here is trying to scan people to identify them. And what we can do about this one is consider a mask. On this next slide, we can, these again are not perfect solutions, but if you use a mask and big sunglasses, oftentimes that will foil some of the lower tier facial recognition softwares. But always be aware of local laws. There have been some local laws that actually prohibit using the masks, and so just be aware of where you are. We're going to go through one more, or actually, let's zoom back out, because where we're at now, we've talked about a lot of different tech pieces, and what really brings them all together is this company called Palantir. Um, we talked about how ICE gets a lot of this information, and how ICE uses that information is through Palantir. Because what Palantir does, again, it brings all of that data together in one place for ICE to use to track and surveil us. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the campaign against Palantir. So on this next slide, Miriam mentioned at the top that we had a really big win recently. Palantir is this very scary tech company. It is supporting ICE. It's supporting the U.S. military in its attacks in Iran. It's supporting the Israeli military in the genocide in Gaza. And many people and many groups across the country and across the world have learned about this company and have stepped up to limit this company's influence and stop its expansion in a really beautiful way. So Palestine solidarity organizations, immigrant rights organizations, labor unions, student groups, environmental justice advocates have all come together to push against this company and to pressure their clients, to pressure their big investors, to pressure the universities that they work with or the politicians that take money from Palantir to cut ties with this company. And just a couple months ago, we successfully we had a massive success because the New York City hospital system actually announced that they will be not renewing their contract with Palantir after the community organized together. We came together in many different groups and brought these concerns to the city council, and the city council members, they also pressured on the New York City hospital system, and ultimately the contract has been committed to being dropped. And so that limits Palantir's expansion into our healthcare. It limits Palantir's influence it has in these different spaces, and really shows Palantir that there's a cost for working with ICE, and there's a cost for helping with the surveillance of our communities and our neighbors. There's been also many wins in the divestment space, meaning that big investors in this company have totally divested and dropped their stock in this company over issues like immigration enforcement or over issues like their work in Palestine with the Israeli military. So the slide here shows that a Norwegian investor divested from the company about $24 million. And there's been many more that have followed after. So this is what this movement looks like, really. And when we're thinking about these tech companies and these very scary surveillance companies, there's many things that we can do. Many things that we can do to both protect ourselves, but also to protect our community by mounting and getting together with our organizations and really engaging in campaigns against them to try to limit their influence and limit their expansion. There's one more piece of tech that we're going to talk about, and that's license plate readers. License plate readers are mainly known through Flock Safety is one of the big companies, and it's a pretty scary system. These license plate readers, they're collecting our information when they pass through toll booths, when we pass by courthouses or certain intersections, or even parking lots, or anywhere ICE or the police has one set up. And as they're scanning us, they also have our locations. And this is one of their many tools that they use to trace people's regular locations to make arrests. And we mentioned Flock. And Flock is one of the companies that sells these cameras. And they capture 20 billion license plates each month using almost 100,000 cameras. So 20 billion. That's almost 40,000 in just 5 seconds. 40,000 license plates. This is all without a warrant or even probable cause. And so we're all caught in what's called this digital dragnet. But it's primarily being used to target immigrants in Black and brown communities. There's also issues about how Flock cameras can see any Flock camera nationally often. So when they have a data sharing agreement, when police have a data sharing agreement with ICE, it also undermines sanctuary city laws that we put in place. So what we can do about these ones is this is another resource I want to share is about knowing where they are. If we go to the next slide, we can see a map. There's two maps that I recommend. There's one called DFlock, which this is actually a screenshot that I got of downtown Denver of these different blue dots. And then also Electronic Frontier Foundation, they also map the license plate readers that Border Patrol has. So I just gave a lot of information to y'all about a lot of different tools. And so we're going to pause here before I pass it to Miriam if we have any questions. With that, I will pass it to Miriam, and I'll be on to answer any questions that any folks have.
Oh, wait, there's a quick question in the chat around 20 billion per month, you say?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's 20 billion license plates per month, and that's according to the company themselves. Um, and again, that mean what that means is there's 40,000 license plates being read in just 5 seconds, and they have cameras all across the country. It's 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 pretty intense. It's pretty intense. And I'm really glad that Miriam will be here to talk about the what's being done locally against these kinds of license plate reading companies.
Thank you, Kenny. Thank you so much for your presentation. And now we're going to move to Colorado. Something that's really important to say is we are a sanctuary state. There's a lot of policy that we have passed to create this and some of our data protection. We're always working with a lot of partners that some of them are in this webinar to make sure that these protections are, that we can expand on these protections as well as work on any possible leakage. And part of the reason that we are doing the spotlight today with Kenny is coming from our new NMS members. Our new NMS members are seeing folks being picked up and are wondering how, right? So part of this presentation is trying to answer that question of how, and it is a lot through mass surveillance. Mass surveillance and what we're seeing is the new frontier of human rights and privacy. It's really important because as you guys have seen, what Kenny was really good at showing is that this is not just for, this is virtual policing, right? We do not know when or if someone's looking at us, which creates a lot of danger for our community. And I cannot cover all. And so today I will be just concentrating on the automatic license plate readers and what is being done across the state to make sure to push back. So we will be covering the basics and highlights of what is happening in Colorado. And also what we're going to be covering is an example of how we use a lot of that fear that we're feeling and overwhelm to push back and push into action. A lot of things, as you might have seen, particularly with fascist and authoritarian practices, is when we feel hopeless and we feel inundated and overstimulated by fear, that paralyzes us, right? So what we're moving into is how some of that fear and anger has been turned into and is being turned into policy as well as into fights into the automatic license plate readers. So with further ado, there's something really important that I also want to make sure we talk about, and it's the myth of benign surveillance. In the right hands, it will not create harm. As Kenny was pointing out, a lot of the systems that we also have in place started through the Obama administration and through Democratic leaders, right? And it's continuing with Republicans, and it will continue with Democrats if there is a change in the atmosphere. However, you know, and going back to believing that this information that's being captured will be safe in the right hands is a way that we have learned leave us unprotected as a community, particularly vulnerable communities. we are all at risk when there is mass surveillance. What is being done to immigrants, and which is what Kenny was showing us, is an example of how and what can be done to all of us with the use of this mass data in the wrong hands. And also, I would argue, are there any right hands that can have this much data on us without possibly harming us? The narratives that are usually pushed around a lot of these systems, particularly with automatic license plate readers, are that these automatic license plate readers will keep us safe, that they will prevent crimes, and that they will solve crimes. However, a lot of this surveillance tech can and has been leading to the creation of new crimes, and once again, being virtually policed without knowing. There is a virtual cage that's being created. There is also, and I can drop the article in the chat as well, is that there's a lot of racism that we have been seeing, and there's already been studies and articles and a lot of just research around how some of these facial recognition technologies and these cameras cannot tell people apart, and the racist practices that happen out of it is false arrests are becoming common. As this expanded, we'll see it more in our communities. And something that I also want to make sure we hold on to mentally is the idea that we are also seeing another way that these cameras are being placed in our communities is another narrative of, well, I haven't committed a crime. I'm free of sin. Therefore, I can prove my innocence if I get wrongly accused. We need to fight this narrative back, because when you are in the system, getting out of the system is a battle in itself. And if we also recognize the belief of I can prove my innocence does come from a very Puritan belief system, and a lot of it doesn't actually show up well in the racial politics that we have, particularly as we have seen around immigration. Similar to bear spray is the way I think about it. I'm not carrying bear spray hoping to get, chased by a bear. However, I am carrying it to protect myself and keep myself safe. And this is similar to a lot of the things, not similar, my apologies. This is going back to what Kenny was saying around some of the things we can do to prevent this, as well as some of the policies and pushes that we can do as community. But at the end of the day, what will keep us safe is no to mass surveillance, which is a deep belief that AFSC holds. And we hope that this presentation is showing you why. Through that, I'm going to go to the next slides, and we have great examples of how community has been pushing back. So we will start with Denver. These are some of the pushback and resistance against flock, which Kenny brought up. He also showed us that very blue map, right, of downtown Denver. Flock, we had around 100 cameras, I believe. And so what happened through a lot of, once again, pushback and investigation and pressure is that Denver's contract with Flock was terminated in March of 2026. This was, once again, through communal pressure, particularly around how Flock can and has been used in other places by federal immigration agencies. This is a victory. However, one of the things that happened, at least in Denver, is in Denver City Council, a contract was pushed to give it to Axon, which is another automatic license plate reader. And so instead of holding time, they were just pushed another contract in. A lot of activists and community members did stand ground and were fighting against Axon, particularly around the narrative of, are these cameras keeping us safe, and are there enough guardrails to protect us? And if already Flock we've seen not be a good fit for our city, why are we pushing another automatic license plate reader this fast? However, sadly, regardless of the push, there was a 7-6 vote that passed a contract with Axon. This is going to be a 1-year contract. It does contain some guardrails, but not enough. And one of the things that this doesn't sound like a victory, but one of the things that's really important to keep in mind is we did enough advocacy that we turned votes. That 6 and 7 margin is really important, because that 6 and 7 margin was created through advocacy of some of the people in this room, as well as through just community members, and saying that we do not feel safe with this technology in our city. After the 1 year, we will be able to push back. However, another thing that's really cool that is in the works already and we're really excited about is city ordinances are being created to create more protections around the automatic license plate readers. And that is what's happening in Denver currently. From there, we go to Longmont. And by the way, after the slide, I will stop for any questions that we have around these 3 locations. In Longmont, the contract with Flock was allowed to expire in March of 2026. And there have been, as well as no talks on contract extensions. So in Longmont City Council, it was a vote of 5-1. And they stated that the leaders in their public safety will explore an alternative option and to turn off the data sharing of Longmont with other cities as of December of 2025. And for my research, there has been no other inquiries pushed around another LAPR, automatic license plate reader, yes, at this moment. From there, we move to Fort Collins, which this is really exciting since it's happened last week. And Fort Collins, they voted through City Council through a vote of 6-1 to immediately end their Flock contract. And on June 16, on June 16th, which was last week, due to privacy and data sharing concerns, they are also now developing a citywide surveillance policy to guide how the city evaluates and uses surveillance data in the future. And they are not seeking any bids for any new contracts. All of this is really important to share. Also, a big thing that I almost forgot to mention around Denver before I open up for some quick questions is that in Denver, the Flock, which I don't know if it's been put in the chat yet or if somebody can put it because my notes aren't letting me do it. But Flock, which is the image, and I can go back, which is this image that Kenny shared. Flock is being updated, right? Since Flock cameras are no longer going to be used in Denver, those cameras, as we know it, have been taken down, and Axon cameras have been put up, right? So we have 100 cameras from Flock that were down and 50 from Axon that are being put up. And this map that shows Flock cameras is being updated to include that, to have the Axon cameras. And so community members are working to update that. However, there is something really cool as well, which, sorry, I'm bummed out. I have a lot of links that I'm not being allowed to share. However, something that is coming up, and let me find it really quickly if I can, is that Denver now has a map of the Axon cameras that community can look at. And while I actually look for that map, if anybody has any questions, Piper, I'll throw it to you to open the space up while I look for the Denver map of Axon cameras.
So, sí hay una pregunta en el chat, pero no sé si Kenny tiene interpretación puesto. ¿Quieres preguntar?
Kenny habla español.
Ok.
Sí, pero...
So, la pregunta es sobre la vigilancia que el Congreso no ha reautorizado todavía de la FISA. ¿Cómo tiene que ver con esto? Y hay un debate en el chat sobre qué parte, que este ley es sobre personas en el exterior, pero también impacta a personas aquí en el interior de Estados Unidos. No sé si quieres decir algo al respecto.
Sí, claro. Pues sí, FISA es muy importante. FISA es muy importante y en el día de hoy no hay FISA. Se llama Section 702 y, y con eso ellos pueden recoger todas las llamadas y los texts de todas las personas. Pero esta ley, but it did not pass. No sé cómo decir. Is reauthorized. Entonces, it's it's a very big victory. And we we are very glad that it happened. But what we're talking about today is about the different private surveillance tools that ICE can use as well. And so I hope that answered your question.
Muchas gracias. Voy a hablar poquito de Denver. Vi en el chat que alguien habló de Boulder y Boulder y otros están en otras dispositivas. Sorry, I forgot I was speaking English. I'm gonna go back to Denver really quickly, and then I will be moving on since I saw in the chat that someone brought up Boulder. Boulder, Durango, and other areas are in the next slide. So as I was saying, this is the new, can you guys see my map? I need a thumbs up really quickly. Cool, thank you. So this map it's on Denver's Gov's website, and I will share it in the chat. Sorry, I'm new to using Canvas slides, and it's just not letting me copy my links. And so through this map, you can actually see the Axon cameras, the new Axon cameras they have, right? We have Halo cameras, and the ones we're concentrating on today are the automatic license plate readers. And as I was telling one of my colleagues, it is the places that they are putting them is really interesting. If you guys have time to look at, for example, at this map, for example, one of them is Alameda and Federal, which, as you guys might know, in this group in the space in Colorado, that is a predominantly Latino neighborhood. And so that is where they have chosen to put that camera. But you guys can look at this map. And as I mentioned, the other deflock map is being updated to make sure that these cameras are included. You can also, there's a search option where you can put an address or find a place. But that is the current map that we have based on the contract being given to Axon. And I think it is really important to mention that this contract was pushed by our mayor. That is something that we also need to keep in mind around how our city government functions, particularly in Denver, since we're a heavy heavy on mayoral powers in Denver. And that's something that we need to keep in mind moving forward, particularly when a big argument of why Flock was terminated was around federal immigration agencies accessing the data. Advocates in the space that have been fighting this contract being given to Axon have also shared fears and concerns about Axon being used for the same purposes as Flock. From there, I'm moving on to Boulder, which I saw in the chat. So Boulder is really interesting right now. Boulder has opened a bidding process in March of 2026 to see what other companies other than Flock can provide the automatic license plate reader tech to the city's police department. Bids did close in May, last month, and right now through the summer there will be a pilot program to see what company gets the contract. This is an opportunity to push back, of course, and really quickly, sorry. For example, in these two places in Denver, right now there will be, as I said, a city ordinance being built where folks that are residents of Denver and can show up to city council, we will be pushing folks to try and make sure that these ordinances that help create protections are passed by putting pressure on our elected officials, right? And then after a year, we will also be pushing back on the contract with Axon. With Boulder right now, it's really interesting because you guys are being set up to do a lot of possible organizing and pushback as a community during this pilot program. From there, another thing that's really important to say is that in late May of, last month, I'm sorry, I'm like, why? I think last month, there was a lawsuit filed by two people from Boulder, two residents, against flock in particular. What they were saying, which is really, really important to keep in mind around privacy and our rights, is that these cameras violate our constitutional rights in Colorado. And I really like this quote from one of the attorneys. Boulder cannot pretend this is about catching criminals when 99% of the people its cameras surveil every day have nothing to do with crime. So those are the two things that are happening in Boulder at this time, the lawsuit and then the pilot program. From there, we move into Durango. An ordinance is being drafted right now with community advocates as well as community members to regulate the city and how they use flock cameras and store surveillance data. They do hope to bring the ordinance in, well, in this month. I haven't seen it yet, but I will keep you guys updated. And what's really cool about this is for all of these opportunities, there are going to be calls to action that come up at this time. There's a couple call to actions, but these are very localized. And for all of these victories, as well as the efforts that are coming up in the upcoming months, are through local organizations. But there's some really exciting news about this that I will also get to. So don't worry, there is a way to participate in all of this. From here, I move to Aurora. So this is really interesting because yesterday the Aurora City Council voted to pass what's called a bond package that will ask Aurora voters in the upcoming election 3 questions on the ballot. And they are to increase taxes to be given. And the way I can explain this, the way I can explain it is that this already happened in Denver last year. There were a couple bills, I don't know for those that voted in Denver that remember that there were a couple bills that were asking if we wanted to fund libraries and the fire department and these very necessary community services. Through those bills, some of that money was also being directed to policing as well as mass surveillance and such thing as the creation of what are called cop cities, right? Where it's like training ground for cops. And so the same thing is being done through this bond package that just passed yesterday. Because it passed through city council, what's going to happen is that now it's going to be in the ballot for those in Aurora to vote in the upcoming election. And so what that means, right, is that a lot of the how we predict that it's going to be worded is similar in Colorado, where a lot of the words used to pass this is that this money would be going to firefighters, community centers, transportation, etc. However, we've seen this done in Denver already, but we will be waiting for the language of the ballot questions and how they are worded. But please stay tuned and keep an eye around this if you are in Aurora. Cool. I can answer some quick questions about what I said before I move on to the other slides I have. I will try my best, and if I can't answer it, I will make sure to find someone that can. Do we have any questions at this time around what I just shared? And thank you, Kenny, for answering the questions in the chat.
Is there a safe alternative to Life 360? Is there a location tracking app for family that does not share with third parties?
I was just typing out an answer to that. I'm not familiar with Life 360. And I'm not familiar with the specifics of many of these location apps. I would always be cautious about a third party um, location tracking, one that's like not built into your phone. Um, Find My Friends is not perfect. And so, and I'm hesitant to recommend it, but I would just always be really cautious about any third-party app that you download from the App Store that promises to track your and your loved ones' locations.
Thank you, Kenny. From there, about what I just presented, I hope that a pattern was clear, as well as when Kenny was presenting his slides, is that a lot of the fights that we are seeing around this technology, particularly automatic license plate readers, are fights being fought at the local level. And the local level, we mean city council. While there are, of course, pushes at the state level through legislation to cover the entire state, a lot of these pushes have been defeated and are very well funded, as well as, well, in Colorado, we are very privileged to have an almost all, well, we have a majority of blue Democrats, which some of these folks have been pushing bills, but also some Republicans have helped around privacy. One of the things that we are seeing is that some of these bills are being killed actually behind the scenes, even before they hit the floor. And this, once again, just considering the power dynamics of our state, as well as the person and the people representing our state, and how we can actually move in a direction. Because just having, a Democratic majority does not mean that we have a progressive state. And so that is something to keep in mind around how some of this legislation is being crafted as well as killed. I believe the ACLU was working on a data protection bill that was, I don't think it was even allowed to hit the floor. But there are, of course, state legislation and options that are being considered and will be drafted. And we also cannot abandon city council and the uber local level in these fights. From here, I'm really happy to announce that there is a new coalition. As I explained around Denver, a coalition was formed to not just push Flock out, but to prevent Axon from being given the contract. This coalition has decided to actually stay and become more of a statewide coalition. We now have a name. It's called Colorado Against Mass Surveillance, which is CAMS. And what we're doing currently is building a base as well as working with local groups. So a lot of the pushes that I was sharing are around, for example, the Durango Ordinance or the win in Fort Collins are coming from members of this coalition. And so a lot of the calls to actions will be coming out from local leaders because as I mentioned, it's a very local fight, while also we are working and considering the fact that we cannot beat every local contract and we cannot abandon the local fight in city council. From there, we will be coming up with more actions. And the minute we have an action on Boulder, which is the one that I see something coming up shortly, as well as Durango, I will be sending it out to you guys, since you guys are already on the listserv for the mass surveillance. But at this moment, we are still just building to make sure we understand what we're doing and doing more research to make sure that the ordinances we are trying to pass at the state, well, through city councils are reflective not only of our values against mass surveillance, but also protect and help our community. From here, another really exciting opportunity, and this is a call to action, if you will, which I, of course, cannot copy and paste. Give me a minute. But the Denver Citizen Oversight Board position is open, and this is an incredibly important position because it has helped us not just push back around Axon, but just in general what we are allowing, particularly in Denver. And I will be putting the link in the chat. If you know, oh, by the way, I also emailed these folks and asked if monolingual Spanish speakers are welcomed, and they are. So if you do not speak English as your first language, that doesn't automatically take you out of the pool of candidates. And this is a place that we cannot abandon. And this is a call to action that I'm so sorry. Yes, Piper, I'm trying to find the link. I dislike Canva slides. Go ahead.
Sí, solo quiero nombrar y quiero que si pueden contestar en inglés, pero quiero nombrar que en el chat hay una discusión sobre qué realmente es la alternativa a estas cámaras que lean las placas. Y estamos nombrando como en Denver lo que pasó es que cambiaron de del contrato, ¿no? De una
Mm,
corporación a otro, pero menos cámaras cuando cambiaron. Am, y cómo podemos convencer a nuestros oficiales elegidos que no es necesario estar leyendo las placas de cada persona. O sea, o si hay algo que no, alguna compañía que lea las placas pero no vende la información, ¿verdad? ¿Qué son las alternativas? Esta es la pregunta en el chat o el debate.
Um, I can start if you want to then add your take, Kenny. As I was saying earlier, personally, I don't, from what I've seen and what we've seen throughout, right, collecting any of this data opens us up to a lot of harm. There can be guardrails in place, and at least for me, pushing for the lack or no, for there to be no automatic license plate readers is the goal to fight back around mass surveillance. But I'll pass it to Kenny to finish or dispute what I'm saying while I answer another question in the chat.
No, I think Miriam, you're right that we should be pushing for no license plate readers. And the reason I say that is because if we could surveil our way out of the problems that we have today, we would have already. If we could spend more money and get more cameras to solve these problems, then we've spent it. And people are throwing more money at this. And think about what that money could instead do if we were investing in our schools, in our
Yeah.
housing, in our healthcare. Those are things that we know that's proven by data and it's proven by people's lives that those are the things that prevent the issues that the cameras are trying to solve. Um, and so that's the most convincing argument that I've heard about it.
Yeah. And something I'll also add is there is a lot of research being conducted on crime. Crime has been constantly decreasing over the past years, right? So what we're also seeing is not just crime decreasing with these constant narratives of, well, we need more cameras to keep us safe. Well, we need more cameras to keep us safe. However, that is not actually working that well. And what we're actually seeing is through the cameras, a lot of injustice and I'd argue crimes against our community are being committed by yeah, I'll leave it there. With that, also Cam, someone in the chat asked how they can join the coalition. Yeah, I will be putting my email in the chat and you guys can email me if you are interested in joining the coalition. And once again, before this call, I was talking to some folks in the coalition on how we can base build with y'all because a lot of the efforts that we're doing are super local. So I will be sending some of those localized actions. And it was hard to do this presentation because my slides are very limited to some of the things that are happening. And like I said, automatic license plate readers. But another thing is, even without me emailing, you guys can connect yourselves to city council. Just start going to some of the meetings. And a lot of the folks that are organizing on the ground are already there in person. And if you guys need help organizing or knowing how to show up for city council meetings, I can also help. More than happy to do that. And the last comment I'll make about the Denver Citizens Oversight Board is if you guys are interested and are monolingual Spanish speakers, I will take time to help you guys fill out an application to be able to show up and apply for this position. And if you're also just not even monolingual Spanish speaker, but are interested and are wondering or need help, I can also do that for you guys. From there, we are getting close to wrapping up our presentation. Something that we always ask in these meetings is if you guys can share something in the chat, or if you guys want to come off mute about something that you guys have learned today or are feeling. Well, from there, since everyone's shy, um, I will be, this is my email. If you guys have any questions, sorry, I will never use Canva again. This is my email. If you guys have any questions or concerns, I can also connect you to Kenny. I'll be emailing the slides, I promise, and we did record, as well as I promised after this.
Miriam,
Yes.
¿puedes ir uno por atrás para que la gente vea la pregunta? Tal vez lo ponen en el chat.
Sí. Yes. Yeah, Canva is the worst, Nate. While we wait for questions in the chat, or if you guys want to raise your hands around something that you've learned and how you're feeling, we're also opening up the space for anybody that wants to stay and just discuss about the really awful information that was shared today. And of course, some of the victories. Talk, talk. Yeah, and I'm reading Miriam Mata from CERC, who was talking about the need to organize super locally. This also goes to the question that someone asked earlier about, is there an alternative to automatic license plate readers?